So we can begin. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to begin with some apologies. We're a few minutes late. We got a little bit lost in the hallways. So we're here together to talk about the Alps, a European region under construction, with you in the framework of this Festival on Geopolitics. And Mr. Nicolas Evrard and Mr. Raja, I'm going to present to you. My name is Alexandre Mignot. I work at the Grenoble-Alpes Metropole, and I'm working on mountain topics in the city region and also in association with the regional park. And I also have worked a lot on these European mechanisms and systems, in particular their application at the level of the Alpine Arc, which has led me to meet with these two speakers several times. I'll begin with our guest, Raffaele Raja. You are Italian, from the Lombardy region, from Milan, and you're in head of the Lombardy Region Delegation in Brussels. Nicolas Evrard, you're the mayor of Servoz in Haute-Savoie, at the entrance to the Haute Vallée de l'Arve, and you're a member of the Alpine Committee. You can explain what you do in this, and you have a key role for many reasons, but especially because you're in the international working group on this Massif committee, and you can shed some light on the interests of this specific body for the macro region of the Alps. So I propose that we jump straight into the heart of the topic. A simple question. We thought we could begin this way. Who's heard about the European Union strategy for the Alpine region? $11, 12, 13 out of how many in the room? Roughly 15%. 1 in 10 people. So this is a big challenge. There's already the challenge of knowledge, of being aware of this policy, and then analysis, understanding, and the understanding that it's a very young project too. And I'm not sure how much time we have to talk about all of this. You'll see that our speakers are very eloquent on this topic, and I invite you to ask them questions. We decided we weren't going to make a presentation of 15 minutes, which often drifts into 20 minutes or more. So we would rather that you garner information through the discussions and interactions. The macro region question is complicated in the European level. It comes from an idea in the early 2000s at the scale of the Adriatic, where the countries along the Adriatic Sea talked about different issues and stakes in terms of defense and maritime trade. And based on that, a discussion started in European bodies, leading the Commission and other European bodies to think about the relevance of cooperation, multinational cooperation mechanisms at the level of territories or watersheds that should make sense, depending on different stakes, to be defined and studied together. And based on that, 4 strategies were set up. 1, The Baltic Sea, then the Danube River, the Adriatic Sea, the Ionian Sea, and the last one, the SUERA, or European Strategy for the Alps. That was launched in 2016. These bodies have quite a complex governance system. They're in charge of defining an action plan with the problems that Raffaele can bring up. Because as we discussed this afternoon's debate, this Alpine macro-region has a turning presidency, and this year it's Italy through the Lombardy region delegation that has taken on the presidency. And so they're in charge of defining the action plan and its priorities. So specific groups, specific governance action plans with their inconveniences and positive aspects. And right now there are no laws or directives. These macro regions are based on a specific document called a communication. It's all linked to documents whose legal application is quite weak or non-existent. So it really depends on the goodwill of the stakeholders, the states, and the regions. So I'll stop there. You already have quite a few elements, and I'm going to take my seat. And I'm going to invite Raffaele to speak. You're now you have the presidency for the year of the European Strategy for the Alps. So I'll start with a basic question. What are these Alpine macro-regional strategies? What's this object, this European system, to potentially provide the Alpine arc? What can it provide? And how can this, through the presidency, do you hope to contribute? Thank you for your invitation and for giving me the opportunity to talk about the Italian presidents of the European Strategy for the Alps. I apologize, I have a sore throat, and my French is also poor. So talking about the European Strategy for the Alps, you said something very important. There's no law, no structure, no financing. There's no budget. So what's the European strategy for the Alpine region? You said it's a system, a measure, or as my friends from Foreign Affairs in Italy say, it's an exercise, something that will be reworked every day and it based on the goodwill of the regions and the states that participate. In terms of strategy for the Alpine region, how is it determined in the European documents? You've heard that it's a communication paper from 2015, July 2015, from the European Commission with an action plan that describes things to be done, objectives for the long term. And amongst the objectives, there are 3 pillars to the strategy. The first pillar is the economy. Second pillar, transport. More than transport, real connectivity, physical connectivity of transport systems, and also the connectivity through internet and IT. The third pillar is the environment, of course. It's a very important challenge that cannot be forgotten for the Alpine region. So the borders that we've defined are the borders of the 48 regions, 22 regions plus Switzerland. So we'll talk about Switzerland, but it's different. All of the states, the 7 states that are in the Alpine Arc are included. And the regions that are involved in this strategy are Bavaria in Germany, in Austria, Italy, and France. Slovenia doesn't have a region as such. They will set it up. But what's most important is that the Alpine strategy is a product of the regions. The regions are at the origin of the strategy. The states didn't want it, but they accepted it. I'm speaking from a regional point of view, of course, and we have continued discussions with the states to see how we can manage the macro-regional strategy. There's a type of cooperation between the regions. This cooperation has always existed, so we're not reinventing the wheel with the Alpine strategy. But we wanted to do more, something bigger, something more important, something more sustainable than just the different projects and programs that we already have, the cross-border programs between Italy and France, Italy, Austria, France and Switzerland. So something that is at a larger scale. And of course, encompassing the big challenges of that dimension. If you look at the Baltic Sea, the management of that region after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the ex-Soviet countries had problems managing the Baltic Sea. There were a lot of problems with pollution and transport, and the states that are on the Baltic shores decided to do something different. Let's imagine a type of cooperation that is based on the individual energy of each state. There were no rules or laws, and this is the same thing for the Alpine region. There are no defined rules after even 10 years. It's been 10 years that we've been talking about this region, but we're at the same point. There's no possibility of introducing the concept of macroregions in the European Commission documents and in the programming at the European level. So there's a contradiction here. On one side, the Commission and the European institutions cannot prevent the regions and the states from starting the discussion and this cooperation operation in the field. But on the other hand, they must maintain the status quo, the real situation in the field of the states, the relationship between the states and the regions. So this is the difficulty of the strategy. It's difficult to move forward and to achieve things that can be understood by the citizens. So I'd like to talk a bit about the basis of the European strategy for the Alps. We're in a context of difficulty and lack of clarity. In this context, we are trying to do things. And that's why we have this changing presidency so that everyone's involved, and to make sure that there's a real commitment from the institutions and the politicians. We decided to have this annual presidency period. It's not something that's easy to manage, What's important is to maintain the continuity of action. And so we'll see what actions we've undertaken and where we would like to go. It's important that we maintain continuity despite the fact that we have this rotating presidency. And we want to keep the principles that are set up between the previous and the coming presidency. Before us, the Tyrol region was the president. The Tyrol region is not Austria. It's an autonomous region in terms of strategy management. In Italy, we can't do that, and in France, it's not possible either. Italy and France have practically the same institutional architecture. In Italy, there are more powers for the regions, but there's a very centralized state nonetheless. And we have the Italian presidency, 2009, 2000, and then we'll have the French presidency. So 2019 Italy, 2020 France. So as I listen to you, and you say we haven't really made much progress, even though we've been working together for 10 years or so. We've been working on this macro-regional strategy. There's also the Alpine Convention, which is an international treaty that was signed by the 7 countries of the Alpine Arc, plus the Principality of Monaco. And like many treaties, it has a well-established action plan with application protocols. It has a secretary's office. So the Alpine macro region was set up to try to get away from this very state-managed system that was not very flexible. So the regions decided to try to work at a European level to carry the voice of the Alps. But as I listen to you, I'm wondering if the European scale is the right level to hear the initiatives coming from a regional scale in order to structure things that are more than just systems or exercises, but real territorial, macro-territorial organizations that have meaning and have some strength and power at the European level. That comes to mind as I speak to you. And a few words about the Italian presidency, and then we'll hand over to Mr. Evrard. Sorry, I'm taking a bit of time on this point. But you said you talked about the Alpine Convention. It's the absolute opposite. It's what we really don't want to do. But the Alpine Convention works quite well, can accomplish things because it has a structure, laws, international treaties. So it's well positioned in the status of Europe and the States. It's a constraining agreement, and it has financial backing. And those are things that we don't have in the European strategy for the Alps and the macro-regional strategies in general. So in the macro-regional strategy, there's the free lands, no specific organization, no rules. No new rules. So we do everything with a distance. So it's really based on the goodwill of the stakeholders to build together, to share resources and existing measures to perhaps create more relevant ones at that scale. If there are questions, I'll come back to this, but I'm going to move on now. But it's interesting to understand how we can progress in this field. Now the Italian presidency. There's a problem in terms of the initial method that we started to use as a region. We couldn't have a Piedmont or a Lombardy region presidency. There are 8 regions, 27 million inhabitants, practically 1/3 of the Alpine region, which has 80 million inhabitants. So the first thing that we did was to set up a signed agreement with the state. The state entrusted us with the presidency for the year if we came up with an agreement, an official instrument that was signed by the stakeholders, and that's part of the register. So it's very bureaucratic, but it gives us the possibility of managing and organizing the presidency at the level of the regions. So we're a plural presidency with several regions. The Lombardy region is coordinating the 7 other regions and autonomous provinces. There's a lot of diversity in the north of Italy. We have sea regions, mountain regions. We also have the plains with very different economies and different languages. In northern Italy, we have Germany, French used in the Aosta Valley. We have bilingual regions. And it's quite complicated to manage. But we've been coordinating regions in the Alpine projects for quite some time now. So it's possible for us to manage this annual presidency. So that's the first point of methodology. Now, in terms of content, we've shown, or we brought up the green economy. So it's often used everywhere. And we're trying to achieve things, organize conferences, and to advance on certain projects while rolling out this green economy into different topics. So we could see it from an economic standpoint, the environmental standpoint, sustainability. How can we ensure the continuity of the economic cycle? Of the economic cycle, the circular economy, if you like. So those are some of the main ideas that connect the events and initiatives that the different regions will be organizing during this year. Another important point for us, it's very important to involve the local authorities. Until now, we've had strategies everywhere. The Baltic is practically just the states. The Danube strategy started to involve regions. And with the Alpine strategy, that the regions started to have more power at the European level. Almost all of the regions are working together at a certain level of power at administrative levels. So our challenge is to involve all the other levels. In general, we talk about multi-level governance. So bringing in together all the different levels that are close to the citizens in the provinces or in the département in France, the commune or the municipalities are the first level for the citizens. So why not involve the municipalities in the challenges of the Alpine strategy? This is quite difficult because if in northern Italy, in this region, we have 3,500 municipalities, and that's just Italy. If you think of all of the municipalities throughout the Alps, it becomes quite complicated. But our interest, our will, is to talk about the strategy So we have a knowledge gap here, as we've seen, in terms of the strategy. So there's something that's not working.
That's it.
So the strategy would have to be better known, and we need to be able to spread it everywhere. In terms of continuity with the French presidency, well, that's the direction that we're moving towards. The Tyrol has decided to get young people involved at all levels, and we need to make headway with that approach, and we need to work on the local authorities or with the local authorities. We're all in contact with the French presidency, and I think we should have more involvement and participation on behalf of the authorities. So that's it for the French presidency, and I'll stop there for the moment. Thank you, Raffaele. I'm going to attempt a transition now. This is a fashionable word today. So we've understood that the Alpine region may be a utopian union. But what about the question that I asked Raffaele? Let's ask the same question of Nicolas. So, what can we do the opposite exercise? Can we ask ourselves whether the Alps, whether what we're trying to build, this Alpine region, whether this region, it can offer the European Union something? How does the region contribute to the construction or consolidation of the Union? It's not necessarily the golden age of the European Union at the moment. The title of the conference is a union and malunion or de-union. And this is a hot topic at the moment. So how can a system like this help to build a better Europe? Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to the conference. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to everybody for being here for this fairly laborious subject, which is plunging us into the heart of the European Union operation. So multi-level governance. The European Commission is wondering about cross-cutting governance. It has been wondering about it since the 2000s. There was a little problem in the great 80s and 90s integration period, impelled by Jacques Delors, taking us through to the start of the 2000s, and there's now a break between the different levels. So the Commission is wondering how it can rethink the way the European Union works. The treaties, the Nice Treaty was a failure. The French were not very good when they had the presidency. But that's the debate, and it's the debate that was on the table in the 2000s. And there are a number of regional authorities networking to try and focus on a regional policy. This is what we started doing in the 2000s. But there was an objective missing, and that is the objective of regional cohesiveness, economic and social cohesiveness. And we've got the regional level is missing. The Italians, the French, and a few others have tried to push for this. We've tried to set up a link with the subject of governance. Often we confuse, but not just in France, the question of governance and the question of government. And the discussions that we've already had on the macro-regional level proves that we're talking about similar things, but it's very difficult to define the limit between the two. And the challenge for strategy is to look at governance first of all. So the question of governance emerged in the 2000s. There was a white paper published by the Commission on governance, and the regional question or regional cohesiveness very clearly emerged in the debate with the Constitutional Treaty and then the Lisbon Treaty, the hidden daughter, if you like, or hidden son. I don't know whether it was a daughter or a son, that talked about regional cohesiveness in 2008. But let me insist on the fact that the European Union is an unfinished process. What can the Alps do for the European Union? Well, first of all, we have to see it as an unfinished process. There are two major trends in geopolitics. You've got the idea of centralizing, having an intergovernmental operation where the states are the real bosses. This is still the case today. And then there's another logic, more of a federal logic, that has been around since the 80s, where skills and powers are transferred with the co-decision making between the Parliament and the Council. Europe, with its 27 or 28 countries, we don't know how many there will be. Maybe the British will tell us one day if they eventually decide what to do. So there's the question, therefore, brought up by Raffaele and Alexander. It's a governance at multiple levels. And the community level, it's highly integrated, the intergovernmental level, and then the interregional level that you've maybe heard of, the interreg level, this cooperation between regions, the networks of different regions, and the association of European mountain elected officials is part of that interregional level. And you've got the Alpine space, you've got the broad west, you've got the Baltic states, and then the cross-border, Italy, France, Italy, France, Switzerland, Spain, France. There are cross-border regions everywhere. So these different types of logic are interregional types of logic. But then you have the question, how do you link them all? How do you bring it all together? What about local investments? What about cooperation? What about getting Europe closer to these regions? And this is something that has been impelled by the Scandinavians, by the Baltic countries, by the Swedes in particular. They said, OK, that's enough. Let's stop waiting for Brussels to do something for us. Let's come together around the table with the Russians and work on the common challenge, the environmental challenge and the transport challenge to begin with, plus the energy challenge. And we mustn't forget that there's a historic link here in the Baltic region. That cooperation has a long history stretching over thousands of years. So in the Baltic strategy, you've got states and you have the metropolitan areas, the major cities that are also present in the debate. There are also major ports, and that's not by chance. So the Scandinavians launched the idea, and the idea works. It woke us up in the Alps. And as of 2008 with Raffaele, we were in Chamonix. When France had the presidency of the European Union, the subject was dealt with in Paris when there was a conference on regional cohesiveness. And so we looked at macro-regional strategies like the Scandinavians were looking at. So there was a lot of talk, but there were a number of stakeholders, European stakeholders as well, in Brussels, in the regions, who also wondered whether there wasn't an opportunity to be seized on in order to bring this technocratic Europe more together. But Europe is no more technocratic than its different countries. But the idea was to say, OK, we need to bring Europe closer to the challenges, our challenges. Otherwise, it's going to get lost and we'll all be losers. And we'll be losing out on the advantage of working together, the interests, the common interests that we have. So it wasn't simple. But as Raffaele was saying, it's the Bavarians who used their political clout and built in Brussels. They set up a conference. So for them, it wasn't all about Berlin. They said that the Alpine regions, as part of a macro-regional strategy, could have something to say directly to Europe. So very clearly, it was an Alpine driving force that was behind all of this. Political influence in a European debate. So the Commission saw the strategic interest of moving beyond the debate and discussion between the states and the Commission, which was how the European Union has always worked, with the Council being the key. And so the idea was to do something differently, because that's the way things were organized for treaties. So there was this ambiguity. And in the 2000s, between 2011 and 2014, a process emerged, supported by states, taken over by states, notably France, helped by Thierry Pontin as a Savoyard, who was in charge of European affairs. And the focus was on regional ideas put forward by the regions, and an agreement was set up, rather an opportunistic agreement. The idea was to say, okay, the 28 countries of the European Union, we need to focus on some of the specific aspects of Europe's different regions. So we tried to, at that time, streamline things. We were wondering about the European budget at the time, the budget of the different states at the time. We were all victims of the 2008-2009 credit crunch. And so we wondered how to streamline, to harmonize all of that. And so the Macroregional Strategy gained in power because it aimed to be more efficient. So there's a link between the Alpine Valley Network and the Alps, because the Alpine Valley Network is based on a lot of cooperation and always has been, and I will stop there. So there's a lot of cooperation. There's the Alpine Convention, there's the Alpine Space, there's cooperation locally with the different working groups focusing on cross-border areas. There are Euro regions. There are many things out there, but all based on different types of logic. So the idea was to streamline everything, to set up the right kind of governance, to give meaning to all of this structure, to provide them with objectives. So in reality, we haven't got there yet. So you might have a positive analysis of this macro-regional strategy and say that there are some clear difficulties trying to set up a real European policy that adapts to its different regions. Programming European funds, well, it takes 6 to 7 years. And we've built the macro-regional strategy, and we've looked as far forward as 2020. But even with the existing funds, we haven't been able to streamline them around the same objectives. So the challenge in the future for the Italian presidency in Lombardy and the French presidency is to be ready in 2020, because we're currently looking at regulations and budgets and European funds. So the idea is to streamline everything, harmonize everything, so that we can focus on shared objectives defined at macro-regional level. And I can add something else to this because it seems important. We're talking about a slightly broader scope, in fact, than the Alpine Convention. The Alpine Convention focuses on mountain areas, and sometimes mountain dwellers and mountain municipalities didn't like this because often it was more, the Alpine Convention was very much coordinated at an intergovernmental level, whereas local municipalities had different philosophies. And so it was seen as a kind of way to put the mountains in their own little silo. So the idea was to have more sharing, not just between mountain areas, not just between high mountain areas and valleys, but also between metropolitan areas. And this is a clear and strategic challenge. You know, what's happening in Grenoble, what's happening in Milan and Turin and Munich and Vienna is also interesting for different populations, different areas. I think this is a clear challenge for the coming years. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. I had a question, but perhaps we need to stop there and maybe have some questions from the floor. But I've got this question that I just want to share with you first. The scope of the Alpine Convention was very much focused on mountain areas of the Alpine Valley Network. And the regions wanted to focus on a macro-regional strategy. And we were talking about not having a scope at one specific point in time. There were people that were for not having a specific perimeter, but who were for taking into account urban areas, large metropolitan areas, peri-alpine metropolitan areas. Zurich, Munich are not that far away from the Alps. We can't say that Zurich is in the Alps, but it's not far away. Milan, Marseille, Lyon, Vienna. So we people wanted a broader area in order to just concentrate on the interdependency between these areas, the natural interdependency that existed. Mountains have never existed alone, and neither have cities, and we're in a good place to say this here in Grenoble. So the idea was to focus on that interaction between metropolitan areas and the Alps. And that was something that should have been at the heart of the macro-regional strategy, but it's something that's been lost over the course of time. So now we need to rework on the links between urban populations and mountain populations. This is one of the ideas of the French presidency, to try and focus again on these interactions for the macro-regional strategy. So if you agree, I suggest now that we hand over to the participants of this session, and I'm sure they have some questions. Thank you. So my question is, how is this going to be felt at local level, at Grenoble level? Who are the stakeholders? Is it the Metropolitan Authority? Is it the City Council? Is it the Regional Council or the County Council? I can ask you, as the president of the international working group of the mountain range. So the regions, first and foremost, as Raffaele said, it's the regions who are at the heart of the process, who are behind the political willpower. So these are key stakeholders, the regions. And in France, it's more the CGIT, the Future Agency for Regional Cohesiveness, that is behind the steering wheel. And what's new over the past few months is the integration that we have. We don't have enough integration yet, but we do have the integration of the Metropolitan Authority. We've got Alexandre, who is looking at technical aspects, and the idea is to get the département or counties involved, there, especially ones that are cross-border. And the challenge, and that's why I was saying that I'm talking as a member of the Massif Committee, in French mountain policy, we've got this Massif focus, this mountain range focus, which is not just about the mountains, but about other areas like the Piedmont area. So, if you're from Chamonix, you will understand what I mean. The Piedmont region is not just Italian. In fact, this is something that has been lost. Grenoble, the Metropolitan Authority, had lost sight of that. I know this because I talked with a number of the Alpine Geography Institute researchers. These are questions that researchers ask themselves. It's almost paradoxical when you're analysing regions. You wonder whether the metropolitan area is kind of the back country, but, you know, what about Grenoble? Aren't the Alps the back country of Grenoble? So, you know, these are European challenges. If we talk about innovation in our villages, for example, I'm not shocked by that. It's something that I would continue to do when I go to Brussels. I talk about the challenges that we have in villages. But if we talk about budgets and challenges at European level, we know that these local challenges should be seen as Alpine challenges. We should adopt this kind of logic, because this can only help mountain regions as well. So the presence of metropolitan areas can only help everybody. That's why we're all around the table today, so that we can have this upstream, downstream solidarity, so that the metropolitan areas are more globalized. If I could just open a parenthesis at this point, I personally So I've been following this system at metropolitan level or municipal level or city level, whatever you like to call it. Let's imagine that the integration is perfect, and we can talk about both indifferently. Whatever the case, for our local areas to buy into this system, a little bit like what Nicolas has just been saying, you need two triggers. The first is that the Macroregional Strategy and its partners and its French partners open the doors to us. In other words, the General Commission for Regional Equality, as we've just heard, and the regions need to buy in. Now, to be clear, it wasn't owing to mistrust, but we were just not invited in the past to be part of it. The approach of the French presidency and the Macroregional Strategy has changed that. Some key French stakeholders have been invited, people belonging to the association, people belonging to the region, and I can paraphrase what Nicolas has just said. We need to come back down to earth, basically. It shouldn't just be all about Brussels talking about what it thinks is useful. It has to come from the ground. And this is what Raffaele was saying. It's about getting local authorities involved. And that's when the door was opened. I think it was last year, when the president of the Metropolitan Authority, who received a letter from this commission saying, Mr. Ferrari, please come with us, please be part of the team. And of course, we were very happy to receive that letter. And so we said, yes, of course we'll be involved. Now, there needs to be a second trigger. And this is what Nicolas has just said. The local authority needs to see that mountain reality that is specific to our metropolitan area. And this is fairly recent. It's about Brest or Marseille thinking, oh, yes, we are next to the sea. So paradoxically, local institutions said, yes, maybe we need to do something about our mountains because they're everywhere. We've got 49 municipalities in the metropolitan area. 34 are mountain municipalities. Maybe, we should be working more closely with them. So I'm cynical because I'm in charge of this kind of thing. And there the trigger is, progressively implementing a metropolitan policy focused on mountains. The Metropolitan Council voted last February for a mountain framework that specifically cites the strategy of the European Union. So you can lend credit to different deliberations voted on by our elected officials, and I know what I'm talking about, being myself a civil servant, but very concretely it means that you've got to also then invest the means, human means, financial means, and as it's an obligation, it means that we've got to work with our authorities and get them to take part in the life of the region, in what's happening at regional, macro-regional and European level. You've got to find the right links so that everybody is involved. And we hope that we'll be able to create these links as part of the French presidency so that we can facilitate or at least act as a driving force. And this means that we're working, side by side with the region. We want, as part of the French presidency of the Alpine Convention, that the question of the relationship between cities and mountain areas is at the heart of what's being decided. This is what we were saying about the Tyrol and what we were saying about young people. It's really the interdependency is very important. We've always experienced this interdependency here in Grenoble. And this theme has come through with the Macroregional Strategy. So we should be able to get our feet back down on the ground and focus on some very concrete problems, how to use and manage our forests in the metropolitan area. 50% of the metropolitan area is covered with forests. We've got to make sure that we're using less carbon But what does that mean today for a metropolitan area to manage its wood in a municipality with some very specific characteristics, different constraints, different budgets, economic requirements? It's true in Grenoble, but it's true in many other Alpine cities. In Bolzano, for example, it's true. In Bern, in the Swiss valleys, it's also true. So there's a gentleman at the front there. Or a gentleman behind us, sorry. Yes, hello. Thank you for what you've said. It seems to me that one of the important aspects is transport, allowing people to meet. So here we are in a very sensitive region when it comes to transport, and there's the question of the high-speed train. One of the major representatives, Mr. Salvini, is opposed to this high-speed train with the North League and with their allies. Well, sorry, therefore, but the allies, the Five-Star Movement, are against the high-speed train. What do we do about that? And, of course, this leads me to wonder about Lombardia. Lombardia was the cradle of the North League movement. Raffaele, sorry. I think, well, you knew that you wouldn't escape this kind of question. Anyway, good luck. Thank you. Of course, I can only answer with the words of my president, the president of Lombardia. This is the official stance. I can't answer for what the national government is saying. I can't give my opinion or any comments about the national government. But I can tell you what my president, Mr. Fontana, thinks. He's the president of the Lombardy region. And he clearly said that the high-speed train between Lyon and Turin was a priority for the Lombardy region, just like for the Piedmont region. So So it's also in the interest of Lombardy to have this high-speed train link. It's not just linking Turin and Lyon, or Lyon and Turin. It's also about linking the area with Paris. It's about having a corridor between Eastern and Western Europe. So obviously it's something that's taking us beyond local regions. So, of course, you have to have precautions. You have to have the right instruments that take into account the specific requests or demands of regions. But at a large scale, at European scale for Lombardia, it's something that has to be done. That's my opinion. But it's also the opinion of my president in Lombardia. Nicolas. Yes, without talking about the domestic policies in Italy, I can't obviously talk about that, but this question is not dealt with in the macro-regional strategy. Some of us believe, like, you've got Lyon, Turin, and you've got Brenner. So transport is financed largely by the European Union. It would have been good to have a debate together, regions, states, local authorities, associations, etc. It would have been good to talk about these two questions, especially because we had the Swiss around the table and we could have talked about their experience in rail, because that's very relevant, that experience. No. So the regions were for, but the states refused to include this subject as part of the macro-regional strategy. Therefore, that's why the process has not been fully explored. We haven't decided collectively yet. So we can discuss things. We need to work on a consensus. That's the objective of governance. But we can't decide whether the government is regional or national or whatever. And just to try and answer your question, France, well, being the president of the Alpine Convention this year means that, you know, following the Italian presidency for the Macroregional Strategy, there's the question of air quality and local mobility, transnational or even European mobility. We also need to deal with these subjects. There's no taboo subject. There shouldn't be any taboo subjects. So for the Lyon-Turin high-speed train, this is something that concerns many people.
Switzerland is at the heart of this European region under construction. It doesn't belong to the European Union. So how can you imagine the integration of Switzerland, which is really the center of this Alpine region? How can you integrate it on a practical level? And what's been done in this field so far? I'm only a few kilometers from them in the Chamonix. I almost feel like I'm part of the Valais or the Aoste Valley. This is the experience that we can have with Raffaele and Alexandre. Switzerland was a driver for this process. Switzerland started to feel a bit isolated in the Alpine Convention. They were expecting something more pragmatic. That's one of the Swiss strong points. They want things to be useful. They don't want to waste their time. So Switzerland pushed very early for the Macroregional Strategy. And I can say this because I like Switzerland, but with a certain political opportunism, this question is a major political one for them. It wasn't subject to a votation or the federal debate, but it allowed them to stay in the European Union and to work with the European Union, not on integration, of course, but reinforced cooperation on major environmental challenges, transport, the economy. There were 6 points: education, possibly, professional training, and such. So the Swiss are actively working on these topics without being part of the EU. Very pragmatic of them. I'd like to add something. Switzerland, from an institutional standpoint, is different from the other states. When we organized the first meeting of the stakeholders in December 2014, we invited all the presidents of the regions, the 48 regions, because theoretically there are 48 regions. We invited the Swiss cantons, and we received an answer from the president of a canton. I won't give you the name of the canton, in the center of Switzerland, and they said, "Great, I hope you're very successful, but we're not part of the Alpine strategy." So I started to wonder, seeing in the meetings that we're organizing with Switzerland, they have the federal government, but no cantons represented. Perhaps only 1 or 2 at a time participating. And we were told that the cantons are free to belong or not to what the federal government does. So the federal government can't automatically involve the cantons. So it requires a specific buy-in from the cantons. They have their own constitution, their states, if you like. I'm Italian, and for me, it's completely inconceivable. If the state agrees to do something, automatically all the members of the state are part of the agreement. And that's a centralist vision. It's not a confederal vision like the Swiss vision. So it took me quite some time to understand the difference in institutional architecture. So it's not a philosophical question, it's a real problem, because we don't know who we're to communicate with in Switzerland. The federal government doesn't have the possibility to do it. The cantons have the power. So which canton do I need to speak with? In the mountain ones, but so you'd think only the mountain cantons would belong to the strategy. But that's not the intention of the strategy, as Nicolas said. The center of the strategy, the raison d'être for the Alpine strategy, is interaction between the cities and the mountains. So we don't want to isolate the mountains in a closed-off area like the Alpine Convention does, which has very different objectives. So for Switzerland is a bit of a problem. I have a lot of Swiss friends, but it's not a philosophical difference. It immediately turns into an operational difference. So to give results to our Swiss friends who want to achieve tangible things, it's quite difficult. Nicolas said it's the Grisons playing the coordination role for the Swiss cantons. The canton des Grisons was the coordinator of the canton intervention in the strategy for Switzerland. And it's Bern, that's the motor of the process for Switzerland. So it's 6 minutes past 3. We have 9 minutes left. I had other comments concerning the opportunity generated by the Alpine macro-regional strategy for countries like France or Italy to step on the board of Alpine questions that are usually dominated by our German-speaking friends. So Nicolas, Raffaele, everybody, as a matter of fact, I have a last question. To my knowledge, and I didn't do a full analysis of this, but I haven't identified at a global scale this time any similar measures, flexible measures to build a transnational tool for cooperation. So are you aware of this anywhere else in Asia, Africa, any part of the world? I participated with the University of Geneva, Bernard de Barbieux, and others on the question of environmental governance, and there are similar examples, soft examples as you call them, examples of soft governance. An example that seems quite interesting because it's a cross-border one. The Great Lakes in North America, they're managed with a governance strategy that's similar, where the states plus the provinces and the federal governments work together on the environmental challenges. So they have similar processes. There are similar processes across the world. Given the complexity, we have a density of actors and economic and environmental stakes that are quite dense. We're unique in having so many themes, even though we've tried to focus on just 6. It's not always clear enough. But we have a unique density of stakeholders in our project. So Canada and the U.S. manage the Great Lakes and the states and the provinces concerned on mostly environmental questions. So they're speaking off mic. So Burgundy-Franche-Comté also belongs. There are 3 French regions involved: Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, Sud, and Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, and the Bourgogne-Franche-Comté region. The Jura is part of the Prealps. So I'd like to conclude for the Italian presidency saying that the real challenge, the real stakes beyond the projects, the things that we want to do, the objectives in the action plan, is what Nicolas was saying earlier. We have a lot of interconnected topics, institutions, and levels. And I think it's a school of democracy that we could establish in the Alpine strategy. It's a grandiose word, perhaps, but in a situation like the one that we have in Europe now, and maybe even across the world, where we're lacking democracy and there are risks for democracy, I think almost this daily exercise of debate and discussion, talking about the things that we want to do, we can do, we cannot do, this could be very important to bring us together and to have a different way of addressing problems. So there are things that are part of the Commission's action plan that are part of the objectives of the strategy, the stakeholders' platform. So we don't know how, and we don't know what this platform will resemble. So we're imagining an IT platform, a tool that we could use to, rather like a chat group or WhatsApp or something similar. But it's a platform, it's something that the Commission and us, when we wrote this action plan, we imagined having a type of area or space, a non-physical space where we could bring together the different voices and questions and perhaps not have a solution, but we could at least talk about the problems, which is a good rule for democracy. So if we don't want to talk about the things that be done for the strategy, the green economy, the economy in general, so to be conclusive, what the Italian presidency and the French presidency can bring to this strategy is perhaps a small share. How can we involve people and institutions at the level of the territories? Is there a last question or comment? Otherwise, I think these very encouraging words can be our conclusion, so that the macro-regional exercise for the Alps becomes a way of building democracy in Europe. That's quite a good conclusion. Let's hope that it succeeds. And to come back to the first question from the gentleman, for Grenoble, and I know that the department's also trying to find the space around the table, and we're very in favor of this. We work a lot with the department. It's an indispensable level for dealing with these issues. But the local authorities of the Grenoble metropolitan area are concerned about maintaining and participating in this democratic exercise, which is the macro region of the Alps, to build and consolidate Europe. It's 14 minutes past 3. I'm extremely punctual. So there are a few seconds left if you would like to say something. Is it going to snow this weekend? Yes. And otherwise, thank you all for your presence. Thank you to Raffaele. Good luck with the Italian presidents. I say good luck in a very optimistic way, and thank you to Nicolas. I had a deal with Nicolas, and he wanted me to present Maire de Cervoz, and you saw him presented as the head of the European Association of Elected Mountain Officials. So thank you, both of you. Thank you, everyone, and the School of Management in Grenoble for this festival.